Hey, what's up, everybody? Checking in with you all here. Like many of you, I just heard the news that Jimmy Kimmel is returning to ABC's airwaves on Tuesday. Now, Walt Disney has already released a statement, or the Walt Disney Company. Let me be clear about that. Walt Disney been gone a long time, but Jimmy Kimmel is returning. He's coming back, and this is a statement directly from the Walt Disney Company in announcing that Kimmel would return. Last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It is a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill timed and thus insensitive. We have spent the last few days, we have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. And after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday. I will be completely honest. I am shocked that Jimmy Kimmel is returning to ABC because once they made the decision to pull his show, and let's understand how that decision was made, or at least a little bit of how we know it was made based off the reporting that we've seen, is that ABC received a lot of pressure. Well, it was three levels of pressure. It was the FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr saying publicly that he wanted that he felt like Jimmy Kimmel should be reprimanded, and publicly calling for him to be punished because of comments that he made in the wake of Charlie Kirk being murdered, which he felt were crossing the line. Now, I don't have time to play what the comments were, but Jimmy Kimmel essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I don't think this paraphrase is misrepresenting what he's saying at all. Jimmy Kimmel said that MAGA was going out of his way to distance itself from the assassin and trying to do everything possible to paint him as some kind of left wing political nutcase, basically. Even though there has been no reporting at all to suggest that this man was in any way left wing. Of course, we have heard family members supposedly have told the media that he became a little bit more politically active in the last couple of years, or in recent years, I should say. And that was all we knew. He's never voted. He wasn't a part of any radical, I don't know what these organizations would be, but nothing that suggested he was a part of any radical left wing organizations. Now, obviously, in the initial days of the reporting, it came out that his parents are quite conservative. And being that he's in Utah, there was a lot of discussion about what his political leanings could be. And I think what we've probably discovered since all of this has come out is that I don't know that he fits in any clear cut political model, left or right. And I know people are looking at his alleged relationship with his roommate, who is a trans person who's transitioning, and people are just assuming that because of that romantic relationship, that means that he's left wing, as if they're not members of the queer community who are not right wing. We don't know what he is, left or right. But Jimmy Kimmel, he made a joke. Or an observation, I should say, at first, about the fact that MAGA was going out of his way. And the president, before we knew anything about this murderer, immediately branded him a left-wing person. And all of MAGA, of course, as they are known to do, they all stepped in line. And it was like left wing, left wing, left wing. And everybody's like, hold on. We don't know anything about this. So obviously more details came out. And then Jimmy Kimmel made a joke in which he said that Donald Trump was mourning Charlie Kirk like a 4-year-old. His exact words, or the exact joke, was he was mourning Charlie Kirk like a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish. Like they had a goldfish as a pet. And you know, listen, I know we are living in sensitive times, and anytime you're dealing with something that was as abhorrent as what happened to Charlie Kirk, that there is going to be some raw nerves. But one thing is for sure is that, like, you can't have the government pressure people, pressure networks about content. I thought that's a very obvious First Amendment thing. If people just decide to stop watching, that's one thing. But when you have the FCC commissioner saying publicly that Jimmy Kimmel needs to be reprimanded, and thus putting pressure on the affiliates to then pull his show, and the two largest ABC affiliate holders, Nexstar and Sinclair Broadcasting, which is a right-leaning company, when they made the decision to pull Kimmel's show, it put ABC obviously in a position in which they had to decide, what are we going to do here? Now, as many of you know by background, I also used to be a Disney employee. I was at ESPN, which is owned by Disney, for over a decade. I too ran into a situation with Donald Trump in which Donald Trump publicly called for me to be fired, as did Sarah Huckabee Sanders also called for me to be fired. And immediately, people always get the timeline wrong of what happened to me. I made the comment on social media, not on ESPN's airwaves, on Twitter. I made the comment that Donald Trump was a white supremacist and he had surrounded himself, meaning his leadership in the administration, by other white supremacists. Show me the lie. But nevertheless, it was a violation of ESPN/Disney's social media policy because I specifically criticized a political figure, which we are told at Disney not to do. But it was a lot of backlash on the right and the left, and it put ESPN in a really awkward situation. And so that I was not removed from the air, even though there were a lot of right-wing groups and right-wing voices that were pressuring Disney to suspend me in that moment for what I said on social media. That didn't happen. I came back to the air. And then a few weeks later, maybe not even a month later, Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys said that if any player on his team decided to take a knee to bring awareness and attention to social injustice, he was going to cut them. Now, I immediately called out the hypocrisy of Jerry Jones saying this, because Jerry Jones has also been known to give multiple chances to players who are accused of serious crimes or even commit crimes. Greg Hardy comes to mind. Greg Hardy, who was convicted of domestic violence. Later, the case was thrown out because of a technical snafu. They couldn't find his victim. But there was plenty of evidence that showed that Greg Hardy, not a good guy. And he was more than welcome on the Cowboys. Meanwhile, if you made the mistake, as I'm putting in air quotes, of actually standing up for what was a clear problem in this country in police brutality, state sanction violence against people of color, then you were considered, in his mind, to be unfit to be a Dallas Cowboys. And I thought that was a reprehensible position for Jerry Jones to take, though him and Donald Trump are friends. He donated to his campaign. So I shouldn't have been surprised. Meanwhile, once Jerry said this, a lot of the Cowboys fans got very upset, got very pissed. And they were, especially a lot of the Black fans, because the Cowboys have one of the largest Black fan bases in the NFL. And a lot of fans were upset, not just Black folks. So I don't want to just say it was just us, but they were calling for the players on the Cowboys team to respond and let Jerry Jones know, the man who is signing their checks, let him know that what he said was unacceptable, and even maybe to go as far as to boycott being on the team. And the one thing, I had a big problem with that. I had a huge problem with that because as fans, you have a lot of power. And this was my position. As fans, you can determine a lot. There's a reason why we've seen strategic boycotts work. And instead of asking the players to risk everything, you sitting there with your remote. You could turn off the Cowboys at any time. No one is forcing you to watch them. So instead of forcing the players to give up their livelihood, why don't you just turn off the remote and watch another team or not watch the NFL at all? And so I tweeted this and said that, hey, instead of putting everything on the players and making them sacrifice everything, why don't you sacrifice? Why don't you sacrifice 3 hours on a Sunday to not watch the NFL? And I went into an explanation about how, like, yeah, the Cowboys, they have really important advertisers. So why don't you boycott them? If this is that important to you, then you as fans have a lot more power, frankly, than the players do, because they're locked into contracts. You're not contractually obligated to watch the NFL. And of course, the usual dishonest characters, they made a big headline out of this. Next thing you know, it's all over the right-wing circles. And that's when I got suspended by ESPN. And I understood the suspension because at the end of the day, I stood on what I said. Let me be very clear about that. I stood on what I said. And I wasn't going to apologize for what I said. And I certainly wasn't going to take back what I said about Donald Trump. But what I said directly impacted the money. I mean, the ESPN has multi-billion-dollar deal with the NFL. And so by me suggesting that the fans boycott and take it out on the advertisers, as they say, you fucking with the church's money. And I mess with it. And I'm okay with that. I can live with that. And I can live with the suspension. It was no big deal. Well, it was a big deal in the sense of how it impacted my career. But when something like that happens, then you kind of know where everybody stands. And there's a level of trust there that is broken between you and the corporation that you work for. Now, I'm seasoned enough as a journalist to understand that when we're working in media for these corporations, for these companies, particularly if you're in legacy media like ESPN, ABC, NBC, that's considered CNN. Those are legacy media corporations, that you are in a conditional relationship. Your job is to entertain people, for people to respond to you, for you to give people insight, context, reporting, and their job is to pay you. That's as far as the relationship could go. And even though I had very excellent relationships at ESPN, I felt like the trust had been broken because the president called for me to be fired and y'all didn't say anything publicly. And I was raised under a journalism ethos that you never let City Hall come after your reporters. Like, you stand with them, especially against the government, because this is a part of how a democracy works, is that you have to be able to have a free press. It's the essential component of a democracy, a free press and freedom of speech. Those are two core principles you have to have for all of this to work. And once I realized that we had reached our fork in the road, I knew my relationship with ESPN was over. And so, drawing upon my experience, when I saw what happened with Kimmel, I said, he's never coming back. Because ABC, by capitulating, not just the first time they've capitulated to this administration, ABC/Disney, they did it with George Stephanopoulos when they settled that bogus lawsuit and essentially gave Trump a payout. They essentially got extorted. And once I saw that, you're putting everybody on notice that's in a front-facing position, especially those that cover politics and covers these thorny issues. You're putting them in a bad spot because something inevitably, especially with this administration and with this president, who's particularly sensitive, you're putting them in a bad position because eventually they're going to piss him off. And then you have to decide, do I have the fight? Do I have the stomach for this particular fight? And I think with ABC/Disney, they have shown they don't always have the stomach for it. So they're in a precarious position because they're at the mercy of this administration. And so, knowing how precarious that trust can be, I was pretty positive that Jimmy Kimmel would never return to ABC's airwaves because they have shown him, we ain't gonna have your back. At most, I think Jimmy Kimmel should have clarified, maybe even just said, okay, I got that one wrong. Even though when you watch his comments, to be honest, I found them benign. But let's just say, and according to the reporting that I've seen, the Disney executives didn't have a problem with what he said, but they got put in a vice grip, and they really didn't have any support on this. You have your affiliates who are pressing you, and you need them as part of your business model. And then suddenly one of your biggest star on the network is caught in the crosshairs of an administration. And so I thought Disney was in a really impossible spot. I'm not saying that I feel sorry for him, but I do think it was very complex. And once a organization shows you that they're not going to have your back, there's no way for you to go. So I'm as stunned as anybody that Jimmy Kimmel is actually returning to the air. And of course, now that this is all played out so publicly, we're all going to wonder, is this going to be the same Jimmy Kimmel? Is he going to back up off of Trump? Is he, you saw that, I'm sure you guys have seen the report. I certainly did, that I believe it was Sinclair Broadcasting that put some particular demands on Jimmy Kimmel in order for him to return. One of those was they wanted him to make a sizable donation to Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA. They wanted him to publicly apologize. To me, they issued demands that they probably knew he has no intention of ever succumbing to. But I don't know Jimmy Kimmel personally. I think we may have met maybe once, just sort of in passing. But from what I hear about him, like, people generally consider him to be one of the good guys in Hollywood. My guess is that this show is not for long. I think his contract ends in 2026. And by all accounts, knowing the type of person that Jimmy Kimmel is and how highly people regard him, maybe his decision to return, and I am speculating here, so I want people to understand that, but maybe part of his decision to return is based off the fact that he has a whole economy that's built around the show. See, the people that you see on television is not just about that particular person having a job. It's about producers, audio people, makeup artists, technicians. There's probably hundreds of people who work on Jimmy Kimmel's show. And if his show gets pulled, and realize, like, Jimmy Kimmel has a guaranteed contract, but everybody on his show does not. So these are people who, some of which probably have been working with him for years. And he also has the pressure of having to think about how the decisions impact them and their livelihoods. They're making decisions for their family and for their future based off what he's doing and based off the economy of his show. And so I could easily see a scenario where Jimmy Kimmel decided to return to the air to protect his staff. Because I've heard that he's that kind of guy who would do something like that. But if I'm him, and now that Disney has kind of shown me their hand, I wouldn't know where this would leave us, would leave our relationship. And granted, they've been in business together long enough that there's clearly a good relationship that's there. But what are they going to do the next time? See, the thing about bullies and about what the general Trump administration is doing is that it's never enough for them. You've already been extorted to pay him money. You momentarily pulled this show off the air. So what's the next thing? Because the next thing is coming. And especially since Trump has posted on social media, like, oh, while we're here, let's get Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers up off the air too. We know how he feels about The View. Really hates The View. Okay. So even though it's momentary, and temporary, this entire ordeal set a very bad precedent. And I don't think anything that happened let Donald Trump know that he doesn't have the power. I think, if anything, he's probably feeling more powerful than ever, that he can get all of these companies and corporations to bend the knee at his will. But this is also the danger in what the government is supposed to protect us from. See, one of the undercover reasons this is a problem is because the media is now in the hands of too few people. When you look at who owns 90% of the media, and especially now that there's going to be a new deal going forward in which TikTok will be purchased by the same owners of Skydance as CBS, who will now apparently, if the reporting is accurate, they're going to make a bid for Warner Brothers as well. So you got one family in charge of very powerful media. And because you have such massive media platforms in so few hands, then that means they are vulnerable to pressure all the time. All it takes is the wrong person being in office or the wrong administration to not respect the institution of democracy, and you get what we have right now. And of course, there are some of these companies and leaders at these corporations who, from a value standpoint, align with Donald Trump. So that makes it even more dangerous, because then we become state propaganda. We become state-run media. And when I was coming up in journalism, I realized that I was a newspaper reporter for years before I even got to ESPN. I wanted to stay in newspapers. Like, my dream job was never to work at ESPN. My dream job was to actually work at Sports Illustrated. And so I was a print person. And the biggest change, or one of the biggest changes that I've seen in media over the last 30 years, is that the companies are no longer in the hands of multiple people. They're in the hands of a few. A lot of the newspapers, when I was coming up as a young journalist, were owned by families, and they were not subject to the same public pressure. And they were not subject to this kind of government influence, not as badly. Certainly things happen. And, it was a different time and a different age. And so the media, while not completely independent, it felt more independent. And now, these days, it's very hard to find independent media. So when you have this much media in the hands of a few, it's going to inevitably lead to chaos and compromising. So that's like the bigger picture. Now, I mentioned The View because we also have to look at, I believe in the principle of what's understood need not be said. So now that we've been shown multiple times, and this may be between Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, these are very loud examples, if you will. So now that people have been shown that if you don't capitulate, if you don't sort of bend the knee a little bit, then you're vulnerable to losing your job. And so that truth that might be needing to be exposed, maybe they decide that story's not worth it. Or maybe maybe somebody decides it's not worth me saying that because I'm afraid I might lose my job, even though it could be something well within the respectful boundaries of what you're supposed to do as somebody who's on air. Now everybody's going to be running scared because of what just happened. I was in New York recently and at an event, and I was talking to somebody who is a major figure on television. And in conversation, she said that she was essentially telling other broadcast journalists that this is probably the time to lay low. Now, we're in an extremely dangerous time politically for a lot of reasons. The opposite should be happening in journalism, because our entire job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's also to tell the truth. as uncomfortable as it sometimes might be. And so when you see widespread compromising of that, then the idea of journalists being the watchdogs of society doesn't happen. And so nobody's minding the store because everybody's now running scared because they're afraid of what this could lead to. And so it is cast a very dark cloud over our business. But I want people to be clear about something. When I was in New York, I was doing the Atlantic Festival, and talk about the Great Timing Award. I had a sit down conversation with Kamau Bell, who's fantastic. And the Kimmel situation had just happened the night before. Kimmel had just been pulled from the air. So I'm asking Kamau about what he feels about this. And, he made the observation, a funny one, that that this was removing Kimmel from the air in conjunction with Colbert, where the quote canaries in the coal mine, and that this was the moment where we really see that we're in a very dangerous place. And the one thing I wish in that conversation I would have, kind of pushed back on is because, you've heard a lot of people say like, well, if white men are losing their job in those kind of power positions, then what does that mean for the rest of us? Right? Which I get it. Like, I understand why people have that reaction. But this is why, and I hope those who have participated in some level of this Jimmy Kimmel situation, like whether you canceled your subscription to Disney or Hulu, or just said, I'm not watching, like whatever level of action this got from you, I want you to remember that there were others who lost their jobs and did not get the rallying call that Jimmy Kimmel did. And the reason why it's important to remember who lost their jobs and why it should have been rallying then is that realizing this structure of how things work in America is, usually speaking, Black people are the first ones they come for. So it's us, and then it just continues to increase. And so what I would say to those who are in, I saw, like, obviously Colbert, a lot of comedians rallied around Jimmy Kimmel, as they should have, because, that's their, that's kind of their fraternity. And so I get that. But when you see Black women being sacrificed in this same environment, I need some of those same strong white voices to rally around them in the same way. And I'm not saying no one did, but obviously, and one of my good friends is Joy-Ann Reid. And it was unfortunate what happened to her at MSNBC. Tiffany Cross, someone else. And then just recently, Karen Atia, who was the sole Black opinion columnist at the Washington Post, she lost her job. And so when these examples happen, the rallying needs to start there, because usually we're the first ones who are impacted. Don Lemon, same thing. It's like, it's usually us. We're the canaries in the coal mine. We're the sacrificial lambs. And so, as important as I think it was to fight and to be loud about what happened to Jimmy Kimmel, we need to use that same energy for the more vulnerable people. And I'm not saying at all that Jimmy Kimmel, because of how long that he's done this, obviously he's made a lot of money, right? That doesn't justify what happened to him. But when we ignore the smaller examples, or not even, I wouldn't even call them smaller examples, but when we ignore those other examples, of things happening to those who represent the most vulnerable communities, it's only a matter of time before they get to everybody else. It's a moving scale. It's a moving target, I should say. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a moving target. All right. It starts over here, and then next thing you know, it's over here. And Trey Mosley, I agree with that. Shout out to my girl, Melissa Harris Perry. She was the first person who put me on MSNBC. And because it was a different political time, people forget the battles and what Melissa Harris Perry was up against. And while, I'm not at all saying that between all the examples I mentioned, no one has their back. One of the people definitely do. But I think, especially if you're in this position and you're somebody who's white, who has a platform, you need to take on the responsibility of engaging yourself when the fight is brought to us. Because I promise you, it's only a matter of time before it gets to you. And so there is this cognitive dissonance I know that a lot of people have by thinking it won't happen to me or it won't be me. Well, I think we have seen in this political environment, eventually it's going to be you. I mean, we could take immigration as the biggest example, is that at some point, all those people who, I don't know why they thought this, especially since the language seemed to be the opposite, but they thought it was a certain kind of immigrant or undocumented person that was going to be subjected to ICE and all this basically domestic terrorism. And it turned out it wasn't just them. They kept moving the target like, and it wasn't just about criminals. This is just about getting folks up out of here, period. And now that they see that, they're clutching the pearls and acting like they were somehow duped, even though, given what the language was around the conversation, to me, it was pretty obvious about what was going to happen. And so that's just an example, but that target always moves. And part of the game is getting to a target that you don't like or that you don't agree with, and using that to make you go along with your own destruction. That's how it works. So if you felt a way about undocumented people for whatever reason, and you were on that, they're going to replace us type of thing, okay. As soon as you go along with that, the target's coming for you. And then you're going to wonder why you don't have any cushion, why there's no sympathy, why there's no soft landing. So don't just care about the target when it looks like you. You got to care about the target in all cases, because that's the only protection all of us have. So, yeah. Case in point, I support the deportation of all illegal immigrants as a foundational Black American. I cannot be deported, and illegal immigrants are detrimental to my interests. This is what I don't understand about this argument. You got more smoke for some people that come over here and, generally speaking, are just trying to contribute to our economy. Undocumented people, I don't know how slowly I have to say this, are not the reason that Black people are in the position that they are in. They have nothing to do with what has happened to us. They're being used to drive a wedge between us and them so that white supremacy could win. It's really that simple. Okay? And maybe you can't be deported once they figure out that you actually are a citizen here, but you act like these ICE agents are racial scholars that can just stare at you and be like, oh, yeah. And now that the Supreme Court has made it completely legal to racially profile something we know we've been through before. And that's what I mean. That's the game plan. Y'all ain't got none of that smoke for the billionaires, because the thing that's really driving all of this economic instability are people hoarding wealth. Those are not undocumented people. It is people hoarding wealth. All right. It is systems in place to make sure there's a lower class. And if they can pit all the people that are not in the billionaire class, all the people under them, if they can pit them against each other, you will never turn your attention to the people who really are taking your money. The people not paying taxes, the people who are abusing resources. I just read a piece about why electric bills across the country are double and tripling in some places. It's because in some of these areas, they got these data centers that have cropped up that the taxpayers in the area are seeing their electric bills literally triple and quadruple. But you have no smoke for that. You thinking about an undocumented immigrant with a bridge card and thinking that's the reason why your life ain't further, when it's so much bigger than that. And so, and I would say that this is something that all groups, they do this too. You know, those in the Asian community who got hip to it with this whole model minority thing. Yeah. You position one against the rest, boom, white supremacy is like, got him. Got him. So anyway, but before I get out of here, I talked before, I brought up The View. And again, all of these thoughts are from the perspective of somebody who's been in the fire a little bit, in a way that was at least parallel to what Jimmy Kimmel kind of went through and with the government. But it was interesting to me, and maybe this should have been the sign when The View actually today addressed what happened to Kimmel, because a lot of people noticed that they did not address this when this happened late last week. And I think part of it is because their show, I think Friday is a pre-taped show and it's not live. And so they didn't address it, and people noticed, and people wondered if they would address this. So today they actually addressed the Kimmel thing, and here's what they had to say.
Did y'all really think we weren't going to talk about Jimmy Kimmel? I mean, have you watched the show over the last 29 seasons? Yes. So you know, no one silences us. And to all my friends in Italy who reached out, you have to know it's okay. We're still here. We're still broadcasting. And when the news broke last week about Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, we took a breath to see if Jimmy was going to say anything about it first. We did the same thing with Stephen Colbert. Then our show was on tape on Friday. But we are live here today, and we're getting into it now. Okay? Because to be clear, you cannot like a show. Now, I want to make sure I got this right. To be clear, you cannot like a show and it can go off the air. Mm-hmm. Someone can say something they shouldn't and get taken off the air, but the government cannot apply pressure to force someone to be silenced.
And I need people to really understand the difference is the reason why Jimmy Kimmel was such a dangerous moment is because of the government pressure. Now, if the Disney chairman, Bob Iger, just decides on his own, I'm getting rid of Jimmy Kimmel, ratings are a disappointment, the show is no longer worth it, and he makes that decision as the leader of that company, that is completely fine. People have brought up other examples, like when ABC got rid of Roseanne. That was a company decision that had nothing to do with the government. And I believe, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, Donald Trump was the president when she got removed from ABC. And even other celebrities and figures that you want to bring into the picture, like, well, what about such and such? Again, show me where the government pressured that company or organization to make a decision. Now, if you show me that government pressure, I'll say, hey, that's wrong, out of bounds. The government is overstepping. And so you have to realize the difference between government interference and a company making a decision. And that company can make that decision based off reaction from the audience, people protesting. It could be a number of reasons. The people can put the pressure on an organization, but the government can't, because that's not the government's role. At least that's the way they told me this democracy was set up. And so while I'm happy from a larger standpoint that Jimmy Kimmel is returning to the air, because maybe this is the wake up call for us to understand what we're truly facing. But I'm wondering what this means for him going forward, because that's pretty uncomfortable. And let me just say this as it relates to The View deciding to talk about it. This happened to me more than a few times when I was at ESPN, where something happens that is controversial, and then suddenly the company that you work for is maybe in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. It's almost impossible to work at a place that's also in the headlines, because people think that you're supposed to respond the way you would if you didn't work there, and that's just not realistic. And so The View was going to be in a bad spot. While they focused on the government aspect of it, I mean, the truth is, I'm sure there were things they probably wanted to say and didn't, because they realized at the end of the day, they're getting their checks from Disney. So if you expect there to be a layer of somebody just going to risk it all to talk about Jimmy Kimmel, then that probably isn't, that's not even remotely realistic. So yeah, I mean, even for them, knowing how Donald Trump feels about that show, it would be crazy to expect that they even feel like the commentary that they have, that they don't have to watch they walk a little bit more now. I used to say this when it came to ESPN and the NFL, as I found out personally, but I knew this anyway, is that nobody from ESPN ever came to me and said, you can't say this about Roger Goodell, or you can't criticize the NFL for head trauma or for racism or for any of those things. No one at ESPN ever had that conversation with me. But as I said, what's understood need not be said. There's a $1 billion relationship that's front and center every time you have commentary about this league. And not just the NFL. I mean, I'm just picking on them because that's probably their deepest and most sacred relationship. But college football, also the NBA, any league they're in business with, what's understood need not be said. Like, you can criticize them, but you can only take that to a point. So this is kind of the existence you have to manage if you're in legacy media. You have to think about all of those business relationships in order for you to do your job. And so that is, nobody's going to feel sorry for you if you're making a bunch of money on TV, because people say, oh, I've had to compromise for less, right? I've had to compromise and not make money making $40,000 a year. So I don't give a damn about these quote first world problems. But this isn't just about the people who make money on television or, the bigger journalists that this is also something that impacts local working journalists as well. Because as I said, Sinclair and Nexstar, they own a lot of affiliates. These affiliates are in big markets, small markets. So there are local journalists right now who are handicapped and handcuffed with the type of journalism they can do strictly because of who they're owned by. So this is not just something that you deal with when you get to the highest levels of media, when you're at an ESPN or ABC or NBC or CBS. It's something that finds its way and is permeated in every media system that we have. And it's also why I'm a big proponent of supporting local journalism. But even that is more compromised because your local newspapers are also owned by conglomerates. So it's just right now, it's a difficult media environment. Most of the media that I consume is a lot of independent media or media that has more of a worldview. You know, like I watch BBC World, I watch Al Jazeera. You know, some of my favorite independent publications are the Mississippi Free Press, and there's also a great publication that I read, digital publication. It's the Prison Journalism Project, which has some very good journalism in there. So now we're going to have, I guess now if you want to be an educated public, you're going to have to do more, or the Bulwark, Midas Touch. Like I've had to cobble together a bunch of different media, you know, platform, Roland Martin Unfiltered, Joy Reid, Don Lemon. I've had to call together a different media environment because I know that media at a certain level is just extremely compromised. And so as an audience, we have to take on the responsibility of making ourselves more literate through different and independent sources. Because if we're relying on legacy media to save us, we might be in trouble because it's a tough environment right now. And everybody's trying to tread delicately so that they can survive the remaining years of this presidency, assuming it ends then. So it's this is certainly a new day and has been a new day for a while. But anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest with you guys just real quick here on a Monday. Also, let me plug a couple of things. If you enjoyed this, I mean, I'm going to try to do these lives at least once a week. Sometimes I can't always predict what day I'm going to do it because of scheduling. But to make sure that you keep up with it, make sure that you hit subscribe. That would go a long way. So hit subscribe. And also I'm continuing to write for The Atlantic. I have a piece coming out hopefully in the next couple of days, because as we were embroiled in this entire free speech conversation, I decided to have a conversation with somebody who definitely knows what it's like to fight for free speech. And that is none other than Luther Campbell, head of the 2 Live crew, Uncle Luke himself. And so I look forward to posting that piece. That'll be coming out soon. So anyway. Oh, also, yeah, thank y'all for showing up, even though ain't just supposed to be the rapture. I didn't know about that until like 2 days ago. I was like, oh, people really think the world about to end? Okay. Do you? Do you? I mean, everybody getting their rapture fit together. I even saw, you know, on social media, some people went so far as to start selling off their belongings and possessions. So if y'all know of a good rapture garage sale, holla at me and let me know. Because, you know, might be a couple items I need to pick up for the crib. So anyway, enjoy the rest of y'all Monday. I might be back later this week. We'll see how things go. And yeah, y'all stay tight for the rapture. I'll see y'all soon.